Texas Hill Country, April 1873. Keziah Foster stood barefoot in the red dirt outside the sheriff's office, a tattered carpetbag at her feet, and her wedding ring sitting in the dust where her husband had thrown it. Her mouth was dry, but not from silence. She had not stopped talking since sunrise. Not out of nerves, not even out of spite. She talked because it was the only way to keep from falling apart. "He said I talked too much," she told the sheriff again, voice steady even if her hands were trembling. "He said he thought I'd be quiet like his mother. He left me here with no money, no horse, and said to return me like a spoiled parcel. That is exactly what he said." Sheriff Dobbs rubbed his forehead like she was giving him a toothache. "Ma'am, I don't rightly know what you expect me to do. He was your lawful husband." Keziah folded her arms. I told him if he left me here, we were finished." A man stepped out of the feed store across the street and paused, watching. He had a lean build, broad shoulders, and dust on his boots that looked weeks old. His hat shadowed his face, but when Keziah turned her head, his eyes found hers across the road. They were the kind of eyes that looked like they had not laughed in a long time, or maybe never had. He crossed the street without looking both ways, stopped beside her, and glanced at the ring in the dust. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, voice low and warm. Keziah blinked. "I think I will be." He bent down, picked up the ring, and held it out to her. "You dropped this." "I meant to," she said. He gave it back. The man nodded like he understood. "Then leave it." She let it fall from his palm. He watched it land again, then looked back at her. "My name is Silas McKee," he said. "I have a place north of here. Not much, but it's quiet. If you need somewhere to rest, you can come with me." Sheriff Dobbs straightened behind her. "Now hold on. She's free to go where she pleases," Silas said, not looking at the man. "Unless you mean to keep her here against her will." Keziah looked up at him. He was older than her by maybe 10 years, 30 if she had to guess. His hands were rough, and his shirt was patched at the shoulder. He did not smile, but there was something kind in the way he looked at her, as if he already saw the bruises on her heart and did not intend to make them worse. "I talk a lot," she warned. "I have been lonely too long," he said, quiet but sure. Her breath caught. She picked up her bag and followed him. His land sat in a wide bend of the river, where the grass grew tall and the rocks stayed warm even after sunset. The house was small, one room with a porch and a stove that clicked when it cooled. There was a broken chair on the porch and only one bed inside, but she did not say a word about that. "I will sleep on the floor," she said as soon as they stepped inside. "You will not," Silas said. "I will. You brought me here. I will not take your bed." They stared at each other. She crossed her arms. He did, too. "You are stubborn," he said. "My mother called it determination." He let out a breath that might have been the ghost of a laugh. "Fine. We will both take half." She nodded. "Fine." That night, they lay back to back on the narrow bed, shoulders not quite touching. Keziah stared at the low ceiling and listened to the wind creak through the shutters. Her heart beat too loud in her ears, and her throat ached with all the words she was holding in. "I used to talk to myself," she said after a while, "when I was still with him, just to feel like someone was listening." Silas did not say anything for so long. She thought he had fallen asleep. "Then you can talk to me." She turned her head. In the dark, she could just make out the shape of his face. His eyes were open. "You mean that?" "Yes." She swallowed. "Do you want to know what happened? If you want to tell it." She did. She told him how she met her husband in Galveston, how he seemed gentle at first, how everything changed after the wedding, how he told her to stay quiet in church, at the store, even at the supper table, how he shoved her once, how she ran once and he found her, how today he finally let her go. When she finished, Silas said nothing at all, but she heard the way his breathing had changed. Slower, deeper, like he had taken her hurt into himself. "I do not want pity," she said. "I do not pity you," he answered. "I admire you." That was the first night she slept through without waking. By the next week, she had fixed the broken chair and baked biscuits twice. She talked about everything. The sky, the trees, the way the birds sounded different out here than in town. Silas never interrupted. He just listened, nodding sometimes, looking over at her with that same quiet patience. One afternoon, he handed her a tin of nails and asked her to help fix the fence. "You sure you want me holding a hammer?" she teased. "I trust you." She looked up. He said it like it was simple. She wanted to cry. But she did not. Spring deepened. The river warmed. She started laughing more. Not nervous laughter, but real laughter, the kind that felt like sunlight inside her chest. And Silas, he started smiling. Not big, but enough. Enough that one day she caught him watching her while she peeled apples, and when their eyes met, he did not look away. She set the knife down. "What is it?" she asked. He stepped closer. "I have not felt this way in a long time," he said. She swallowed. "Which way is that?" "Hopeful." She reached for his hand, and he let her take it. "I never thought I would feel anything good again," she whispered. He bent his head a little, just enough that his forehead touched hers. "You are good," he said. "You are everything good." And just like that, she started crying. He held her through it, arms strong around her shoulders, and said nothing while she wept into his shirt. When she looked up, his lips were only a breath away. "May I?" he asked. She nodded, and when he kissed her, it was like the whole world went still. The old pear tree behind the cabin had started to bloom, its blossoms pale and trembling in the breeze, white petals catching in Keziah's hair where she knelt by the basin. She'd spent the morning scrubbing the last of Silas's winter shirts, the ones left stiff with dust and sweat from months of work. The water ran cold down her arms, but her mind wandered far from the task. Silas had gone before dawn, saddle creaking faintly under him as he'd ridden out toward the ridge to mend a length of fence he said the storms had knocked flat. He'd asked her, quiet and direct, if she'd be all right alone. She had told him yes, and she had meant it. But the silence pressed in close with him gone. She wrung out the last shirt and stepped back, brushing her skirt down with wet fingers. The cabin behind her stood open to the warm air, the smell of boiled coffee lingering from breakfast. She glanced back, then walked toward the tree, trailing her hand along the low branch where a few blossoms had scattered. A hawk circled above. The sound of it brought her back to the day she'd first stepped onto this land. Her life folded into the small bag she'd carried, her future a blank space she hadn't dared imagine. Weeks had passed since then, but she still caught herself waiting for something to go wrong. A slammed door. A cruel word. The sound of boots turning away. Instead, there had been fence posts and brush fires and long evenings where Silas would hand her a tin cup and sit with her on the porch, his silence no longer a wall, but something that opened room for her own voice. She heard the horse before she saw it. Keziah wiped her hands on her apron and stepped toward the trail. Silas rode into view with a coil of wire slung over his shoulder, his hat pushed back as sweat darkened his collar. He dismounted slowly, favoring one leg. "You've hurt yourself," she said, stepping down the slope toward him. "Stepped in a gopher hole," he said. Horse came up short. "I'll be fine." She took the reins from his hand and led the horse to the post, glancing back at him. "You're limping," she said. "It's not bad." She crossed her arms. "You'll sit. I'll look." He chuckled, soft and surprised. "Yes, ma'am." Inside, he eased onto the bench beneath the window while she fetched the small tin of liniment from the shelf. He watched her with the same steady calm that had unsettled her at first, back when she'd mistaken it for indifference. Now she knew better. Silas paid attention to everything, but he didn't waste words on what didn't need saying. "Boot off," she said, kneeling beside him. He obeyed, wincing slightly as she rolled down the sock and touched the swelling just above the ankle. "No break," she said, "but it'll need rest." He studied her face. "You always know what to do." "No," she said, "but I try like I do." She rubbed in the salve, the scent of pine and camphor rising between them. His leg was warm under her hand, the muscle still taut from the ride. When she looked up, he hadn't looked away. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect? Someone quiet would be cold. You're not." He reached down and touched her wrist, his calloused fingers warm and careful. "You thought I'd be like him," he said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. "I've seen men like that," he added. "I don't think they start that way. But somewhere along the road, they decide they're owed something." She blinked, surprised by the bitterness in his voice. It wasn't sharp, but it was worn into him like a groove. "You knew someone?" He nodded once. "My brother. Took a woman from San Antonio. Pretty thing. He broke her down year by year, until there wasn't much left. I swore I'd never be that kind of man." Her throat tightened. "What happened to her?" "She left." His jaw shifted. "He told everyone she died, but I think she went east. I hope she found someone who listened." Keziah rose slowly, the tin in her hand. Then you understand. More than you know. They didn't speak for a while. She cleaned her hands, set the tin back, and stirred the coals in the stove. He rested with his eyes closed, the late light warming his face. When supper came, they ate shoulder to shoulder at the table, the only sound the clink of utensils and the steady crackle from the hearth. As dusk thickened, he reached into the drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. I was going to wait, he said. She raised a brow. Wait for what? He opened the lid. Inside was a length of blue ribbon, the color faded but still soft. My mother used to say a woman should have something fine, even if the rest of the world's gone ugly. I found this in Fredericksburg 2 winters ago. Held on to it, though I didn't know why. Keziah stared at it, her hand hovering just above the silk. I don't need pretty things, she said, though her voice shook. I know, he said, but you deserve one. She lifted it out, curling it around her fingers. I'll wear it, she said. But only if you let me tie it in your hair first, so you know how it feels to be looked after. He grinned then, wide and real, and it changed his whole face. You barter hard, Keziah Foster. She stood and moved behind him, threading the ribbon through his hair where it had grown long at the nape. When she was done, he caught her hand and didn't let go. You're not going to leave, he said quietly. No, she said. I've been found. And when he kissed her again, there was nothing hesitant in it. It was the kind of kiss that knew its place, that had waited long enough. The summer heat pressed in heavy by late June. The wind moved slow through the hills, carrying the scent of mesquite and dry earth. Keziah sat beneath the lean to behind the cabin, mending the seam of a work shirt that had torn across the shoulder. Her fingers moved surely, though the thread tangled more than it should have. Still, she didn't curse it. Patience had taken root in her, not all at once, but the way a seed swells under good soil, quiet and slow. She heard Silas coming before she saw him. His boots scuffed the packed dirt, and the door hinges gave their usual protest. He ducked under the lintel with a small wooden crate in his arms, one corner of it darkened by what looked like oil. You find trouble or trade? She asked, knotting the thread and biting it off. Trade, he said, setting the crate down beside her. Old man Greeley's boy brought up a busted axle on his wagon. I lent him some chain and a hammer. He gave me these. She lifted the lid. Inside were 3 yellow onions, a folded scrap of oilcloth, and a bundle of letters tied with a fraying ribbon. Her eyes caught on the script looped, careful, faded, but still legible. Whose are these? His wife's, Silas said, sitting down on the porch step. She passed in the spring. He didn't want to keep them. Said he didn't see the point. Keziah ran her fingers over the paper. That's a kind of sorrow I don't understand. Maybe not yet, he said. But you've known enough of it to recognize the shape. She set the letters aside, careful not to wrinkle them. You ever loved someone like that? He looked out toward the line of cottonwoods that marked the edge of the property. I thought I might once. But she married a cattleman with more land than sense. I never said a word to her about how I felt. Why not? His mouth pulled tight. I didn't believe I had anything worth offering. Keziah leaned back on her hands, eyes narrowed against the sun. You do now? He turned, unsure, as though waiting for her to add something else. She didn't. She held his gaze. Don't look at me like I'm about to change my mind, she said. I meant what I said. Silas rubbed his jaw, his voice low. Some days I still wake up thinking you'll be gone. I know that feeling, she said, but I'm not made of smoke. I stay where I'm wanted. He rose and walked to her, the shadow of him falling across her lap. Then I'll give you every reason to stay. She reached up and caught his calloused wrist. You already have. They sat a long while without speaking, until the sky turned the color of rust and the shadows stretched long across the yard. That night, the air stayed warm, and neither of them reached for a blanket. She lay with her head tucked beneath his collarbone, listening to the slow rhythm of his breath. You think you'll ever want to leave this land? She asked. He shook his head, just enough for her to feel it. This is where I belong. Then this is where I'll belong too. Silas didn't answer right away. Then, I want to build something with you. Not just a life. A place that remembers us. Keziah shifted to look at him. What do you mean? I'd like to plant an orchard, he said. Just a small one. Pears, maybe. Something that'll outlast us, if we care for it right. She smiled, slow and full. Then I'll help you dig every hole. He kissed her temple, his voice rough with promise. We'll start in the fall. The moon rose full above the hills, silvering the roof and the tops of the grass. And for the first time in years, Keziah didn't feel like she was waiting for anything to begin. She was already inside the life she'd wanted, held close by a man who saw her, not as a burden to quiet, but as a voice worth hearing. And in the stillness, she whispered, "I love you." Silas held her tighter, his lips brushing her hair. "I've loved you longer than I knew how to say." The first rain came late that summer, after weeks where even the shadows seemed dry. It started with a distant roll, low and persistent, like the groan of something old waking. Keziah stood in the doorway with her sleeves rolled and her hands still dusted in flour, watching the sky darken to a deep, bruised indigo. The wind carried the scent of it wet soil, cedar, the sharp tang of lightning not yet struck. Silas joined her there, his shirt damp from hauling sacks to the loft. He leaned one shoulder against the frame and followed her gaze without speaking. The silence between them had changed since spring. It no longer held back what was true, it let it settle in, take root. "I used to be afraid of storms," she said, brushing her palms together. "My mother would say thunder was the sound of the Lord rearranging the heavens." Silas didn't smile, but the corner of his eyes softened. "My grandfather said it was the bones of the earth shifting. Which do you believe?" "I think it's just rain wanting in." She reached for his hand, their fingers finding each other easily now. They stood that way until the first drops hit the porch roof, sharp and uneven, then faster, until the wood beneath their boots darkened. By nightfall, the wind had eased, but the rain kept on, steady and full. They'd moved the chairs close to the hearth, where the fire snapped low. Keziah had taken out the small sewing box she'd pieced together from scraps and began cutting cloth for a quilt, nothing fancy, just a patchwork of worn shirts and flour sacks. Silas sat near, whittling a spoon from a block of mesquite. "You ever think about the kind of people we'll be in 10 years?" she asked, not looking up from her work. He turned the spoon in his hand. "I think we'll be quieter." She laughed under her breath. "Hard to imagine me quiet." "Not quiet like silence," he said. "Just settled, like a creek that's found its bed." She glanced at him, caught by the way he'd said it. "You plan to still be here with me then?" He set the knife down. "That's the only plan I've ever had that made sense." They didn't speak again for a long while. The firelight played on the edges of their faces, and the storm outside softened to a hush. Later, as they lay beneath the quilt they'd not yet finished, Keziah turned toward him. "You ever want children?" Silas's breath caught, not in surprise, but consideration. "I'd like to raise someone who knows what kindness looks like." She laid her hand flat on his chest. "Then you'd be the right man for it." He covered her hand with his own. "You think you'd want that too?" Keziah didn't answer right away. The thought sat heavy, not with fear, but with weight. A weight that felt solid. "Possible. If I brought a child into this world," she said, "I'd want them to grow up hearing their mother laugh. I'd want them to see their father look at her like she mattered." Silas pulled her closer, his voice nearly lost in the rain. "Then they'd have that." The next morning dawned silver and clean. The creek behind the pasture ran higher, but not enough to worry. Keziah stepped outside with her boots unlaced and her hair plaited low, the chill of wet earth curling around her ankles. The garden rose she'd started had taken to the rain, shoots standing taller, color deepening. She crouched beside the beans, brushing her fingers along the leaves. Silas called from the barn, his voice easy, familiar now. She answered without turning, and he came to stand beside her with 2 mugs of coffee. "You talking to the plants again?" he asked. "I'm giving them something to listen to." He passed her the tin cup, then sat in the damp grass beside her. For a while, they sipped in silence, the air still cool enough to feel like blessing. "You ever think about going back east?" he asked. She shook her head. "Nothing there for me now. I left that life in pieces." He leaned back on his elbows. "You never talk about what you wanted before." "Because none of it fit," she said. "I kept trying to make myself smaller for folks who didn't know what to do with me." Silas turned his head toward her. "You don't bend easy." "No," she said. "But I grow." He reached for her hand again. "Always gentle, never hesitant. That's what I love about you." She looked down at their hands. "You never told me that before." "I know," he said. "I was waiting for the right moment." She smiled, not because she was surprised, but because it had finally been said. "I love you too," she said. "And I don't mind the quiet anymore." not when it's with you. They sat that way until the sun cleared the trees, and the world felt new again. Everything they'd lost had led them here, to a place where nothing needed proving and love didn't have to be earned. It was simply given, day by day, like water to a seed. And beneath the sky rinsed clean by rain, Keziah leaned her head on Silas's shoulder, and he kissed the crown of her hair, and the earth didn't need to shift, not when everything already felt right where it belonged. The last of the summer heat broke under a copper sky. Keziah stood by the stacked firewood, tying back her hair with a strip of muslin as the evening cooled. The days had grown shorter, the air carrying a dry sweetness that told of coming harvest. Behind her, Silas hammered the last of the shelves he'd built into the west wall of the cabin, his way of making space, without saying the words aloud. She'd noticed it weeks ago, but hadn't said anything. Some things were better understood without naming. She turned toward the open door. "How many nails you got left?" "3," he said, brushing sawdust from his shirt sleeve. "Just enough to hang the looking glass, if you still want it up." "I do," she said, stepping inside. "Not because I need it. Just makes the place feel finished." He set the hammer down and took the small glass from where she'd wrapped it in linen. As he worked, she moved beside him, her gaze on the wood paneling. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked, quiet but sure. He paused, one hand steadying the frame against the wall. "I have," he said, "but I didn't want to ask until I knew you'd found yourself here. Not just shelter, a place you belonged." "I did," she said. "And I have." He turned, the last nail held between his fingers. "Then I'd marry you tomorrow if you'd let me." She stepped closer, her voice low. "You could have asked me yesterday." He smiled, not just with his mouth, but in that rare way where his whole face softened. "Then let's not wait." They married 2 mornings later under the cottonwoods near the creek. No preacher, just the two of them, hands clasped, with the river speaking its steady truth beside them. Silas had shaved close and worn a clean shirt. Keziah had stitched a new hem on her skirt. He'd carved 2 plain rings from walnut wood, sanded smooth at the edges. "There's no one I'd rather walk beside," he said, his thumb brushing her knuckles as he slid the ring onto her hand. "No one I'd trust more to share my days." She met his gaze, steady and clear. "I'll be your wife in every way that matters. I won't walk behind you or ahead, I'll be beside you. Always." Afterward, they shared a meal of cornbread and beans, and she laughed when he insisted on offering her the last spoonful. "It's a tradition now," he said. "You get to finish what we start." That night, they lay wrapped in each other, the windows open to the soft hush of the fields. Keziah traced the curve of his shoulder with her fingertips. "You ever think about what kind of old folks we'll be?" she asked. He turned toward her, his voice rough with sleep. "The kind that still hold hands when we walk." They settled into married life like a river finds its bend. She took to candle making, pouring tallow in old tin cups and stashing them on the shelves he'd built. He repaired harnesses for neighbors when they came asking, always quiet, always fair. One afternoon, she brought him a plate of boiled potatoes and salt pork out by the barn and found him sitting on the fence, watching the sky. "Something wrong?" she asked, setting the plate beside him. "No," he said. "Just thinking this is the first time I've looked ahead and not felt afraid." He shared the plate with her there in the sun, and when a hawk cried high above, she leaned into him, her cheek against his arm. By late October, the garden had withered to stalks, and they'd stacked kindling high by the door. Keziah began sewing longer hours, piecing together cloth for what would be a cradle quilt. One morning, she pressed Silas's hand against her belly, and he stilled under her touch. "You sure?" he asked, barely breathing. She nodded. "I am." He didn't speak, just pulled her close with both hands and buried his face in her neck. She held him there, the air thick with unspoken joy. They spent the winter preparing. He built a rocker with careful joints, and she lined a basket with down feathers. When the snow came in January, it fell soft and slow, blanketing the land in a silence that felt like blessing. Inside the cabin, she read aloud from the old book she'd brought west, and he carved buttons from bone while listening to her voice shape each word. Come spring, the child came into the world with her mother's dark hair and her father's quiet eyes. They named her Willa, after the wild river willow that had grown up strong along the creek bank despite the drought. Keziah held her tight that first night, and Silas sat beside them, fingers wrapped around hers. eyes full of something he never tried to put into words. In the months that followed, the orchard took root. They planted 5 pear saplings, each one staked against the wind, watered with rain caught in barrels. Willa grew with the trees, her laughter joining the wind through the cottonwoods, her first steps taken on earth that had been healed by love. Years passed. The cabin walls bore the soft marks of age scuffs from boots. Nicked wood where a chair had scraped too close, the faint soot of 100 fires. But inside, there was warmth, and laughter, and the easy rhythm of a life shared fully. One evening, as the sun poured gold across the grass, Keziah stood at the edge of the orchard, watching Silas lift their daughter onto his shoulders. Willa giggled, arms flung wide as if she might take flight. Keziah's throat tightened, not with sorrow, but with a fullness she hadn't known existed. When Silas reached her, he set Willa down and took Keziah's hand in both of his. "This is the life I prayed for," he said. She leaned into him, their daughter at their side, the orchard behind them, the land steady beneath their feet. "And this," she said, her voice sure, "is the love I never thought I'd find." They stayed like that until the stars came out. No fear, no silence between them. Only the sound of wind in the trees and the quiet certainty of a life built true. Together. Always.